The sun beat down on Caleb's weathered face, each line etched deeper by the relentless wind and unforgiving sun. He tasted grit, even behind his bandana. The dun beneath him, Ghost snorted, sensing the tension tightening Caleb's grip on the reins. They'd been riding since dawn, pushing hard across the parched plains of what would someday be Oklahoma. But today was still Indian territory. Caleb topped the rise, and the sight below stopped him cold. A lone cottonwood, twisted and gnarled, stood defiant against the endless horizon. And tied to it, a girl. A child, really. Comanche, judging by her dark braids and the tattered remnants of buckskin. Vultures circled high above, black specks against the brutal blue. His jaw tightened. Bait. That's what she was. Bait for a trap, a cruel game played by men who'd long forgotten what it meant to be human. His hand instinctively went to the Winchester rifle scabbarded on Ghost's flank. He didn't need to think. He just needed to act. He spurred Ghost forward, the dun's hooves drumming a frantic rhythm against the hard-baked earth. Dust devils, miniature cyclones of red dirt, danced around them like mocking spirits, swirling and twisting in the oppressive heat. They obscured his vision for brief, agonizing moments. He ignored them. All that mattered was the girl. As he closed the distance, he saw her more clearly. Aponi, he guessed her name might be. Her eyes were closed, her head lolled against the rough bark of the tree. Flies buzzed lazily around her face. He could see the raw welts on her wrists, where the rawhide bit into her flesh. He dismounted in a fluid motion, the rifle already in his hands. He scanned the surrounding landscape, his eyes sharp and wary. Nothing moved but the vultures overhead and the dancing dust devils. But he knew they were out there, waiting. He moved to Aponi, his movements economical and precise. He knelt beside her, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. She flinched, her eyes fluttering open. Fear, raw and primal, flooded her dark pupils. She tried to pull away, but the rawhide held her fast. He spoke softly in the broken Comanche he'd picked up trading hides years ago. "Shh, I'm here to help. I won't hurt you." Her eyes, wide with terror, searched his face. She saw the lines of hardship, the weariness in his eyes, but she also saw something else, something that gave her a flicker of hope. He pulled out his Bowie knife, the blade gleaming in the harsh sunlight. With swift, practiced strokes, he cut through the rawhide bonds. Aponi's wrists were raw and bleeding. He ripped a strip of cloth from his bandana and gently bound her wounds. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded weakly, her gaze still fixed on him. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed unsteadily. He noticed she was barefoot. Her feet were thigh and bleeding. He lifted her onto Ghost's back, then mounted behind her. He pulled his canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to her. She drank deeply, her throat working. "Where are your people?" he asked. She pointed vaguely to the south, her expression blank. He knew better than to press her. She'd seen things no child should ever see. He urged Ghost forward, heading south towards the distant horizon. He knew they weren't safe yet. Whoever had left Aponi as bait would be back, and they wouldn't be happy to find her gone. He rode slowly, allowing Aponi to regain her strength. He didn't speak, didn't offer false promises of safety. He simply rode, his rifle across his lap, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The vultures circled overhead, their shadows following them like dark omens. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, he spotted a small grove of cottonwoods in the distance. A creek snaked through the grove, offering water and shelter. He headed towards it. He dismounted near the creek, helping Aponi down from Ghost. He built a small fire, using dried buffalo chips he'd gathered along the way. He cooked some strips of jerky over the flames, offering them to Aponi. She ate slowly, her eyes still wary. He watched her, his gaze thoughtful. He knew he couldn't just leave her. Not out here, Ozcon. He had to find her people. But how? He knew little about the Comanche, their ways, their customs. He only knew that they were fierce and proud, and that they had suffered greatly at the hands of the white man. He sat beside the fire, his back against a cottonwood, his rifle close at hand. Aponi huddled near him, wrapped in his ether blanket. The wind rustled through the leaves of the cottonwoods, whispering secrets he couldn't understand. The night was filled with the sounds of the prairie, the chirping of crickets, the hooting of owls, the distant howl of a coyote. He knew this was just the beginning. The easy part was done. The hard part was keeping her safe and finding a way to return her to her people without getting them both killed. He closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of the night, and waited for dawn. He had a feeling the coming days would be long and hard. He just hoped he was up to the task. The dust devils had followed them even here, whirling just beyond the firelight, a constant reminder of the unpredictable nature of this land and the uncertain path ahead. The crackling fire chased back the encroaching darkness, painting dancing shadows on Aponi's face. Caleb watched her eat, the jerky disappearing slowly, deliberately. Each chew seemed to carry a weight, a story he couldn't decipher. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of those who'd lost everything. It was a hollowness that no amount of food could fill. He didn't press her, didn't try to pry. He knew the prairie taught patience. Some wounds needed time, silence, to begin to heal. He remembered. He pushed the thought away, the familiar ache threatening to overwhelm him. He focused on the present, on the girl beside him, on the need to keep her safe. He pulled out his own jerky, chewing slowly, his gaze fixed on the flames. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. He felt Aponi watching him, her eyes like dark pools reflecting the flickering light. He could feel her fear, her uncertainty, radiating from her like heat from the fire. He finished his jerky, wiped his hands on his worn leather chaps. He rose to his feet, retrieved his canteen, and walked to the creek. He knelt by the water's edge, refilling the canteen, the cool water a welcome contrast to the dry heat of the day. He heard a rustle behind him, turned to see Aponi standing a few feet away. Her eyes reached with apprehension. She was watching him like a cornered animal, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. He held up the canteen, offering it to her. "Water's good," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Cool." She hesitated, then slowly approached him, her bare feet silent on the soft earth. She took the canteen, her fingers brushing against his. He felt a jolt, a strange connection to this lost, frightened girl. She drank deeply, the water spilling down her chin. He watched her, his gaze softening. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a spark of hope, rekindled by the simple act of kindness. When she was finished, she handed the canteen back to him, her gaze averted. He took it, his fingers lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. He felt the rough texture of her skin, the calluses on her hands. He wondered what kind of life she had led, what kind of hardships she had endured. He returned to the fire, sat down beside her. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. He knew he had to say something, had to break through the wall of fear she had erected around herself. "You hungry for more?" he asked, gesturing towards the remaining jerky. She shook her head, her gaze fixed on the fire. "Tired," she nodded slowly. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a small worn blanket. It was thin and patched, but it would offer some protection from the cold night air. He draped it around her shoulders. "Sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. He held her gaze, letting her see the sincerity in his eyes. He wouldn't hurt her. He would protect her. She nodded again, her eyelids drooping. She curled up beside the fire, her head resting on her knees. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing soft and shallow. Caleb watched her, his heart aching for this lost child. He knew what it was like to be alone, to be afraid. He knew the pain of loss, the emptiness that gnawed at your soul. He had carried that pain for years, had learned to live with it, to bury it deep inside. He reached for his rifle, cradled it in his arms. He scanned the surrounding landscape, his senses on high alert. The night was alive with sounds, but he heard nothing that suggested danger. Still, he remained vigilant. He wouldn't let anything happen to her. He thought about his own family, his wife and daughter, lost to the smallpox years ago. He remembered their laughter, their smiles, the warmth of their embrace. He closed his eyes, trying to conjure their images, but they were fading, becoming more distant with each passing year. He opened his eyes, stared into the flames. He saw their faces in the flickering light, saw their smiles, heard their laughter. He knew he could never forget them, but he also knew he had to move on, had to find a way to live with his grief. He looked at Aponi, sleeping peacefully beside him. He saw a flicker of hope in her face, a sign that she might one day find peace, might one day heal from her wounds. He knew he couldn't replace her family, couldn't erase her pain, but he could offer her a chance to rebuild her life. He would find her people, would return her to them. He would do everything in his power to ensure her safety, to help her heal. He owed it to her, owed it to himself, owed it to the memory of his own lost family. The night wore on, the moon climbing higher in the sky. Caleb remained awake, watching over Aponi, his rifle close at hand. He was a silent guardian, a protector in the wilderness. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he would face it with courage and determination. He would not let this girl suffer the same fate as his own family. He would make sure she found her way home. The dust devils, now faint whispers in the starlight, seemed to circle them still. But tonight, they held no power. Tonight, hope held sway. The first rays of dawn kissed the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold. Caleb stirred, his body stiff from the cold ground. He glanced at Aponi, still asleep beside the dying embers of the fire. Her face was peaceful, her tea lashes resting against her cheeks. He hated to wake her, but they needed to be moving. He rushed slowly, careful not to disturb her. He added some dry buffalo chips to the fire, coaxing it back to life. The smoke curled upwards, carrying the scent of burning wood into the crisp morning air. He heated some water in his tin cup, adding a handful of ground coffee. The bitter aroma filled the air, a welcome jolt to his senses. He squatted beside Aponi, gently shaking her shoulder. "Aponi," he said softly. "Wake up, time to go." Her eyes fluttered open, her gaze unweaked. She blinked a few times, then sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her. She looked around, her eyes searching for any sign of danger. "It's all right," Caleb said. "We're safe, for now." He handed her the tin cup of coffee. She took it hesitantly, sniffing the aroma. She took a small sip, then another, her eyes widening slightly. "Good?" he asked. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the cup. She drank the rest of the coffee in silence, then handed the cup back to him. He packed up their meager belongings, stuffing them back into his saddlebags. He saddled Ghost, his movements efficient and practiced. He offered Aponi a hand up onto the horse, then mounted behind her. "Which way?" he asked, turning to her. She pointed south, towards the rising sun. He nodded, urging Ghost forward. They rode in silence, the only sound the rhythmic beat of Ghost's hoofs against the hard-packed earth. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the temperature began to rise. Caleb felt the sweat trickling down his back beneath his thick woolen shirt. He glanced at Aponi, noticing the faint sheen of sweat on her forehead. He knew she must be suffering in the heat, weakened by her ordeal. He stopped near a small stream, dismounting beside a cluster of willows. "Rest," he said, helping Aponi down from Ghost. "Water?" She nodded, her eyes grateful. She followed him to the stream, kneeling beside the cool, clear water. She cupped her hands, drinking deeply. Caleb watched her, his gaze troubled. He noticed the brutal welts on her wrists and ankles, the dried blood staining her worn dress. They were worse than he had initially thought. He could see the raw flesh beneath the broken skin, the evidence of the cruel bonds that had held her captive. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a clean cloth and a small jar of salve. He approached Aponi cautiously, kneeling beside her. "Let me see your wrists," he said gently. She flinched, shrinking away from his touch. Her eyes were wide with fear, her body tense. He could see the memories flashing in her mind, the pain and terror of her captivity. "It's all right," he said, his voice soft and soothing. "I just want to help. I won't hurt you." He held out the cloth and the salve, offering them to her. She hesitated, then slowly extended her arm. He gently took her wrist, his fingers careful not to cause her any further pain. He began to clean the wounds, dabbing the cloth lightly against the broken skin. Aponi winced, but she didn't pull away. He could feel her trembling, her body struggling to contain her fear. He worked slowly and methodically, cleaning each wound, applying the salve to soothe the raw flesh. He could feel her gaze fixed on him, her eyes searching his face. He knew she was looking for something, some sign of reassurance, some indication that she could trust him. When he was finished, he wrapped her wrists in clean strips of cloth, providing a protective barrier against the harsh elements. He repeated the process with her ankles, his touch gentle and respectful. "There," he said, stepping back. "That should help." Aponi looked at her wrists, then at him. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She didn't speak, but her gaze said more than words ever could. He knew he couldn't erase her pain, couldn't undo the horrors she had endured, but he could offer her kindness, could provide her with a safe haven, could give her a chance to heal. And that, he realized, was all he could do. He packed up the cloth and the salve, returning them to his saddlebag. He stood up, offering Aponi a hand. She took it hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his. He felt a jolt, a connection to this wounded girl. He helped her to her feet, then mounted Ghost. He reached down, pulling her up behind him. They rode on, south towards the distant horizon, the sun beating down on their backs. The silence stretched between them, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was a silence filled with understanding, with trust, with a shared sense of purpose. Aponi leaned against him, her body relaxed, her breathing steady. He could feel her fear slowly dissipating, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. He knew they would face many challenges, many dangers, but he also knew that they would face them together. He would protect her, would guide her, would help her find her way home. And in doing so, he might just find his own way home as well. The dust devils danced in the distance, but today they seemed less menacing, less a symbol of chaos, and more a reminder of the resilience of life in this harsh, unforgiving land. The relentless sun bore down, baking the earth and turning the air thick and heavy. Caleb squinted, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He could feel Aponi's small body pressed against his back, her presence a constant reminder of the promise he'd made himself. But beneath that promise, a deeper one stirred. A ghost of a promise whispered years ago, under a sky ablaze with stars, to a woman with eyes as wide and compassionate as the prairie itself. Sarah. His Sarah. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in years. Saying it felt like opening a wound that never truly healed. But now, with this child clinging to him, her fear a palpable thing, Sarah's memory surfaced, sharp and clear as a mountain spring. He remembered her hands, calloused but gentle, tending to the sick and wounded, regardless of their color or creed. She'd seen the injustice in this land, the way the strong preyed on the weak, the way the government broke its treaties, the way the native people were pushed further and further into the margins. "They're just trying to survive, Caleb," she'd said, her voice soft but firm. "Just like us. We have to help them whenever we can." He'd nodded, agreeing in principle. But back then, life had been simpler. They had their own struggles, their own patch of land to carve out of the wilderness. Helping others felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. But Sarah had always found a way. A spare blanket for a shivering beggar, a bowl of stew for a hungry child, a kind word for a broken spirit. She'd had a knack for seeing the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. He remembered one winter, a particularly harsh one, when a group of Cheyenne had stumbled onto their land, starving and desperate. The other settlers had wanted to drive them away, fearing for their own safety. But Sarah had insisted on taking them in, sharing their meager supplies, nursing them back to health. "They're human beings, Caleb," she'd argued, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "They deserve our compassion, just like anyone else." He'd relented, grudgingly at first, but he'd soon come to admire her courage, her unwavering belief in the inherent goodness of humanity. He'd learned a lot from Sarah, about kindness, about empathy, about the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Now, years later, with Sarah gone and the world a much harsher place, he understood the full weight of her words. He understood the promise he'd made her, not just a spoken vow, but a commitment to live a life of compassion and service. He glanced down at Aponi, her face hidden against his back. He didn't know her story, didn't know what horrors she had witnessed, but he knew she was hurting. He knew she needed help. And he knew that Sarah would have wanted him to do everything in his power to protect her. He gritted his teeth, the familiar ache in his heart intensifying. The memories of Sarah were both a comfort and a torment. They reminded him of what he had lost, but they also gave him strength, a sense of purpose. He spurred Ghost forward, pushing him harder than before. He had a long way to go, a difficult journey ahead. But he wouldn't falter. He wouldn't give up. He owed it to Aponi. He owed it to Sarah. And he owed it to himself. He tasted grit between his teeth, the relentless wind whipping at his face. The sun beat down, scorching the earth. But he rode on, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his heart filled with a quiet determination. The dust devils swirled around them, a constant reminder of the unpredictable nature of this land. But today, they seemed less a threat and more a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. He would keep his promise, the one he made to Sarah, the one he made to himself, and the one he silently made to the frightened girl clinging to his back. He would see her safe. He would find her people. He would help her heal. That was the ghost of a promise, and he intended to keep it alive. The sun, a molten coin in the sky, hammered down on them, turning the very air to shimmering waves of heat. Caleb could feel the sweat plastering his shirt to his back, the fine grit of the prairie dust coating his skin. He risked a glance at Aponi. She hadn't spoken a word since he'd tended to her wounds. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, but she clung to him with a surprising strength. The trading post, a cluster of rough-hewn buildings huddled against the vast emptiness, was still a good day's ride away. He'd chosen that direction deliberately. It wasn't the closest settlement, but it was known to be neutral ground. A place where Indians, settlers, and outlaws alike could trade and resupply without bloodshed. A tacit truce held sway there, enforced by the owner, a grizzled old mountain man named Jedediah, who respected only one law, the law of commerce. Caleb knew Jedediah wouldn't ask too many questions. He wouldn't care about Aponi's past or Caleb's intentions. He'd offer them shelter and supplies for a price. And that was all Caleb needed. A place to rest, to assess their situation, to plan their next movie. He urged Ghost onward, the horse's hooves kicking up puffs of dust that hung in the air like ghosts. The landscape was monotonous, a seemingly endless expanse of scrub brush and dry grass. But Caleb knew that appearances could be deceiving. The prairie was full of hidden dangers, of dry creek beds and prairie dog holes that could cripple a horse, of rattlesnakes and scorpions lurking beneath the rocks. And then there were the men who might be looking for Aponi. He hadn't seen any sign of pursuit, but he couldn't afford to be complacent. The men who had held her captive wouldn't give up easily. They would want her back, either to punish her for escaping or to sell her to someone else. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowed against the glare. He looked for any sign of movement, any telltale dust cloud that might indicate approaching riders. He listened for the sound of horses' hooves, the creak of saddle leather, the distant echo of voices. Nothing. Just the wind whistling through the dry grass, the mournful cry of a hawk circling overhead, the relentless pounding of the sun. He tried to imagine what Aponi was thinking, what she was feeling. He knew she must be terrified, traumatized by her ordeal. He wished he could talk to her, reassure her. But he didn't know her language. And even if he did, he wasn't sure what he would say. Words often failed in the face of such profound suffering. He thought of Sarah, of her unwavering compassion, her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. She would have known what to say, how to comfort Aponi, how to ease her pain. He felt a pang of guilt, a sense of inadequacy. He was just a broken-down rancher, a man haunted by his past. What could he possibly offer this girl? But then he looked at Aponi, at her small, fragile body clinging to him, and he knew he couldn't give up. He had to protect her, had to help her find her way back to her people. He owed it to her. He owed it to Sarah, and he owed it to himself. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became almost unbearable. Caleb decided to stop for a short rest, seeking what little shade they could find beneath a scrawny mesquite tree. He helped Aponi dismount, then watered Ghost from his canteen. He offered Aponi the canteen, but she shook her head, her eyes downcast. He didn't press her. He knew she was still wary of him, unsure of his motives. He just hoped that, with time, she would learn to trust him. He sat down beside the tree, leaning his back against the rough bark. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the sun, the heat, the dust. He could feel Aponi watching him, her gaze like a physical weight. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. He didn't smile, didn't say anything. He just looked at her, letting her see the sincerity in his eyes. He wanted her to know that he wasn't her enemy, that he was there to help her. She looked away, her face unreadable. But he thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a glimmer of hope, a spark of trust. He stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice gruff. "We'll reach the trading post by tomorrow." He helped Aponi back onto Ghost, then mounted behind her. They rode on, the sun sinking lower in the sky, painting the prairie with long shadows. The air began to cool, the heat of the day giving way to the chill of the evening. As darkness fell, Caleb made camp beside a small rocky outcrop. He built a small fire, careful to keep it low and contained. He didn't want to attract unwanted attention. He offered Aponi some jerky and water, but she refused again. He ate his own meager meal in silence, his gaze fixed on the flames. He could feel Aponi watching him, her presence a constant reminder of his promise. He banked the fire, spreading his blanket on the ground for Aponi. He knew she wouldn't sleep soundly, not after what she had been through, but he hoped she would at least get some rest. He settled down beside the fire, his rifle close at hand. He kept watch throughout the night, his senses on high alert. He didn't see or hear anything suspicious, but he remained vigilant. He wouldn't let anything happen to her. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, he stirred, his body stiff and aching. He glanced at Aponi. She was still asleep, her face pale and drawn. He hated to wake her, but they needed to reach the trading post as soon as possible. He built up the fire, brewed some coffee, and prepared a small breakfast of jerky and hardtack. He offered Aponi some coffee, and this time she accepted, taking the tin cup with a trembling hand. He packed up their camp, saddled Ghost, and helped Aponi onto the horse. They rode on, the sun rising higher in the sky, promising another day of relentless heat. By mid-morning, the trading post was in sight, a cluster of buildings shimmering in the distance. Caleb felt a surge of relief, a sense that they were finally fought, at least for now. He urged Ghost forward, eager to reach their destination. As they drew closer, he could see the details of the trading post. The weathered wooden buildings, the dusty courtyard, the horses and wagons parked haphazardly around the perimeter. He could see people moving about, settlers, Indians, and a few rough-looking characters who were probably outlaws. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He didn't know what awaited them at the trading post, but he knew he had to be prepared for anything. He had to protect Aponi, no matter the cost. The dust devils seemed to dissipate as they neared the post, as if even the chaos of the prairie held its breath, waiting to see what would unfold. The trading post, a collection of mismatched structures cobbled together from scavenged wood and sun-baked mud, loomed larger as they approached. The air, thick with the smells of wood smoke, sweat, and unwashed bodies, vibrated with a low hum of activity. Horses were tied to makeshift hitching posts, their tails swishing lazily at the flies. A few wagons, their canvas covers patched and faded, were scattered around the dusty yard. Men of all descriptions, settlers in worn-out clothes, Indians in buckskin and feathers, and a sprinkling of hard-eyed men who looked like they'd seen too much and cared too little, moved about with a wary awareness of each other. Caleb reined in Ghost just outside the main building, a low, rambling structure with a wide porch shaded by a tattered awning. He helped Aponi dismount, his hand lingering for a moment on her arm. She still hadn't spoken, but her eyes, though clouded with fear, held a flicker of something else. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps a tentative hope. He led her towards the porch, his senses on high alert. He scanned the faces around him, looking for any sign of recognition, any hint of hostility. He felt the weight of his rifle under his coat, a comforting presence in this uncertain environment. A gruff voice, thick with gravel and years of hard living, broke through the din. "Hold it right there, stranger." Caleb turned to see a man emerge from the shadows of the porch. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face crisscrossed with wrinkles and a long gray beard that reached almost to his waist. His eyes, though faded with age, were sharp and intelligent, assessing Caleb and Aponi with a practiced gaze. This was Jedediah, the owner of the trading post. Caleb had heard stories about him, tales of his fairness, his ruthlessness, and his uncanny ability to survive in this harsh land. "Name's Caleb," he said, his voice low and steady. "This here's Aponi. We're just passing through." Jedediah's gaze lingered on Aponi, taking in her ragged clothes, her haunted eyes, and the bandages on her wrists and ankles. He didn't ask any questions, but Caleb could feel his curiosity, his unspoken inquiry. Passing through, huh? Jedediah said, his voice skeptical. Well, everyone's welcome at Jedediah's, long as they got coin to spend and they don't cause no trouble. He gestured towards the interior of the building. Come on in. I got stew on the fire and beds in the back. But don't think you're getting nothing for free. This ain't no charity house, Caleb nodded, understanding the unspoken terms. He followed Jedediah into the trading post, Aponi close behind him. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smells of dried goods, tobacco, and stale whiskey. Shelves lined the walls, stacked high with provisions, tools, and weapons. A few tables were scattered around the room, occupied by men playing cards, drinking, and arguing in low voices. Jedediah led them to a small table in a corner of the room. Sit down, he said. I'll get you some stew. He disappeared behind a makeshift counter, returning a few minutes later with 2 bowls of steaming stew and a hunk of bread. He placed the food in front of Caleb and Aponi, then leaned against the counter, watching them with his keen eyes. Caleb took a bite of the stew. It was thick and hearty, filled with chunks of meat and vegetables. He hadn't realized how hungry he was. He glanced at Aponi. She was staring at the stew, her expression hesitant. Eat, he said softly. It's good. She looked up at him, then slowly reached for the spoon. She took a small bite, her eyes widening slightly. She took another bite, then another, until she was devouring the stew with a desperate hunger. Caleb watched her, his heart aching for her. He couldn't imagine what she had been through, what she had endured to make her so afraid, so weary. When they had finished eating, Jedediah cleared their bowls. So, he said, his gaze fixed on Caleb, what brings you two to my humble establishment? Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to reveal too much, but he knew he had to say something. We're heading south, he said, looking for work. Jedediah raised an eyebrow, his expression dubious. Work, huh? Well, there ain't much work to be found around here, except maybe for a strong back and a willingness to get your hands dirty. He paused, his gaze shifting to Aponi. And I reckon the girl ain't much use for that. Caleb bristled, his hand instinctively moving toward his rifle. He didn't like the way Jedediah was looking at Aponi, the way he was dismissing her. She's got her own strengths, he said, his voice tight. Jedediah held up his hands, a gesture of peace. All right, he said. No need to get riled up. I didn't mean nothing by it. Just saying it's a hard life out here, especially for a woman alone. He paused, his gaze softening slightly. Tell you what, he said. I got a spare room in the back. You two can stay there for a few nights, on the house. Consider it a welcome gift. Caleb looked at Jedediah, his suspicion warring with his gratitude. He couldn't understand why the old man was being so generous. There had to be a catch. Why? He asked, his voice wary. What do you want? Jedediah shrugged. Nothing, he said. Just a little kindness. It don't cost nothing, and it makes the world a little brighter. He turned and walked away, leaving Caleb to ponder his words. He looked at Aponi. She was watching him, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and hope. He knew they couldn't stay at the trading post forever. It was only a temporary respite, a brief moment of safety in a dangerous world. But for now, it was enough. They had food, shelter, and a chance to rest. And maybe, just maybe, they had found a glimmer of hope in the darkness. The dust devils, though still out there on the horizon, seemed a little further away tonight. The storm was still coming, but for now, they were in on the eye of it. And that, Caleb knew, was all they could ask for. The relative safety of Jedediah's trading post offered a temporary shield, but the undercurrent of prejudice was a palpable thing, a poison seeping into the cracks of their fragile peace. While Jedediah himself remained neutral, driven more by profit than personal bias, the other occupants of the post made their feelings clear. Caleb noticed it first in the sidelong glances, the muttered words that died on the air as he passed, the subtle shift in conversation whenever he and Aponi were within earshot. It was a low hum of resentment, fueled by fear and ignorance, directed squarely at the young Indian girl. He saw it in the eyes of a burly farmer, his face red and weathered, who spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dusty ground as Aponi walked by. He heard it in the snide remarks of a group of cowboys huddled around a table playing cards, who called her squaw and heathen under their breaths. He felt it in the cold stares of the women, their faces tight with disapproval, who whispered behind their hands as Aponi sat alone in the corner, trying to make herself invisible. Aponi, already fragile from her ordeal, seemed to shrink under the weight of their animosity. She ate little, spoke not at all, and spent most of her time huddled in the corner of the small room Jedediah had provided, her eyes wide and watchful. Caleb tried to reassure her, offering her a gentle smile or a comforting pat on the shoulder, but he knew his gestures were inadequate. He couldn't shield her from the hatred that surrounded them, the invisible barbs that pricked at her soul. One evening, as Caleb was fetching water from the well outside, he overheard a particularly virulent exchange. A group of men were gathered on the porch, drinking whiskey and swapping stories. Their voices, already loud and boisterous, grew louder and more aggressive as the night wore on. "Shouldn't be allowing them savages in here," one of them, a wiry man with a handlebar mustache, slurred. "They're nothing but trouble, stealing our land, killing our families." "Yeah," another man chimed in, his voice thick with anger. "And look at that little squaw, probably a spy, planning to slit our throats in our sleep." "Jedediah's getting soft," the first man said, spitting on the ground. "Used to be he wouldn't give 'em the time of day. Now he's letting 'em sleep under his roof." Caleb gripped the handle of the water bucket, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to confront them, to tell them to shut their mouths, to defend Aponi's honor. But he knew that violence would only make things worse. It would confirm their prejudice, escalate the situation, and put Aponi in even greater danger. Instead, he took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. He filled the bucket with water, then turned and walked back towards the trading post, his footsteps slow and deliberate. As he passed the men on the porch, he didn't say a word. He didn't even look at them. He simply continued on, his way, his presence a silent challenge, a wordless declaration of his unwavering support for Aponi. The men fell silent as he passed, their eyes following him with a mixture of hostility and unease. They knew that Caleb was not a man to be trifled with. They had seen the hardness in his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way he carried himself with a quiet confidence that spoke of experience and resilience. He entered the trading post, his gaze sweeping the room. He found Aponi in her usual corner, huddled on a stool, her eyes fixed on the floor. He could see the fear in her face, the way she flinched at every sound. He walked over to her, setting the bucket of water down beside her. He knelt down, his eyes level with hers. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. He held her hand for a long moment, letting her feel his strength, his resolve. Then he stood up, his gaze sweeping the room once more. He met the eyes of each person in the room, letting them see the warning in his gaze. He was telling them without words that he would not tolerate any harm coming to Aponi. He would protect her, no matter the cost. The atmosphere in the trading post shifted. The whispers died down. The card games grew quieter. The laughter ceased altogether. The occupants of the post, sensing the tension, the unspoken threat, began to avoid Caleb's gaze, to move away from him, to give him and Aponi a wide berth. Caleb knew that this was only a temporary reprieve. The prejudice was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But for now it was enough. He had bought Aponi some time, some space, some measure of peace. He sat down beside her, his presence a silent shield against the hatred of the world. He knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, that they would face many more challenges, many more obstacles. But he was determined to protect her, to guide her, to help her find her way back to her people. He owed it to her. He owed it to Sarah, and he owed it to himself. He would not let the darkness consume her. He would not let the prejudice of others break her spirit. He would stand by her side until the storm had passed and the sun shone again. He would be her protector, her friend, her ally. In this harsh and unforgiving land. And the dust devils, though still swirling around them, seemed a little less menacing tonight, as if even the forces of nature recognized the strength of his resolve. The days that followed settled into a strained rhythm at Jedediah's. The blatant hostility subsided, replaced by a wary distance. Caleb knew it was a fragile truce, dependent on his constant vigilance. Aponi remained withdrawn, her spirit dimmed by the prejudice she faced. He found himself constantly weighing their options, the burden of her safety heavy on his shoulders. One morning, Jedediah approached him as he was tending to Ghost. The old man's eyes were shrewd, but there was a hint of something else there, perhaps concern. "Caleb," he said, his voice gruff as always, "got a proposition for you." Caleb straightened up, his hand instinctively moving towards the rifle at his hip. "What is it?" "There's a wagon train heading west in a few days," Jedediah said. "Mostly families, looking for land. They're short on hands, need someone to help with the livestock, scout the trail. Good pay, steady work." Caleb frowned. He knew what Jedediah was getting at. "And Aponi?" he asked. Jedediah hesitated. "There's a couple of families on the train. They're looking for help with the kids, the cooking. Aponi seems like a smart girl. She could learn quick." Caleb's heart sank. He understood. Jedediah was offering him a way out, a chance to place Aponi in a relatively safe environment, away from the dangers that lurked in the wilderness. It was a tempting offer, a practical solution. But the thought of leaving her here, alone among strangers, filled him with a deep sense of unease. "I don't know, Jedediah," he said, his voice hesitant. "I promised to take her back to her people." Jedediah sighed. "And how you gonna do that, Caleb? You don't even know where they are. And even if you did, this country's full of dangers. Comanche raids, outlaws, starvation. She'd be safer here, with folks who can look after her." He paused, his gaze softening. "Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is let go, Caleb. You can't protect her forever. She needs to find her own way. Build her own life." Caleb knew Jedediah was right, at least in part. He was just a broken-down rancher, ill-equipped to navigate the complexities of the Indian territories. He couldn't guarantee Aponi's safety, couldn't promise her a future. Maybe Jedediah's offer was the best option, the most responsible choice. But the thought of abandoning her, of breaking his promise, gnawed at him. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability in her posture. He couldn't just leave her to fend for herself in this harsh world. "I need to think about it, Jedediah," he said, his voice low. Jedediah nodded. "Take your time, Caleb. But don't wait too long. The wagon train leaves in 3 days." Caleb spent the next few days wrestling with his decision. He watched Aponi, studying her movements, her expressions. He tried to gauge her feelings, to understand what she wanted. But she remained an enigma, her thoughts hidden behind a wall of silence. He tried to imagine her life with the wagon train, working as a cook or a nanny, surrounded by children and families. Would she be happy? Would she be worthy? Would she ever forgive him for leaving her? He also considered the alternative, continuing their journey, facing the unknown dangers of the wilderness, relying on his own limited skills and resources. It was a daunting prospect, a gamble with potentially fatal consequences. He confided in no one, not even Aponi. He couldn't bear to discuss his dilemma with her, to burden her with his own doubts and fears. He carried the weight of his decision alone, his heart heavy with uncertainty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fiery hues, Caleb found Aponi sitting by the well, staring into the water. He approached her cautiously, his footsteps silent on the dusty ground. He sat down beside her, leaving a small space between them. He didn't speak, didn't touch her. He simply sat there, sharing the silence, the solitude. After a long moment, Aponi turned to him, her eyes filled with a question he couldn't answer. She reached out and took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. She didn't say a word, but her touch spoke volumes. It was a plea for help, a silent request for guidance. In that moment, Caleb knew what he had to do. He couldn't abandon her. He couldn't leave her to the mercy of strangers. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it, no matter the cost. He squeezed her hand, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't need to speak. She understood. He stood up, pulling her to her feet. He looked towards the west, towards the setting sun, towards the unknown. "We're leaving in the morning," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to find your people." Aponi's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting within them. She nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. Caleb knew that he was taking a risk, a leap of faith into the darkness. But he also knew that he was doing the right thing. He couldn't turn his back on her, couldn't abandon her to a life she didn't choose. He would protect her, guide her, and help her find her way back to her people, even if it meant facing unimaginable dangers. He owed it to her. He owed it to Sarah, and he owed it to himself. As they walked back towards the trading post, hand in hand, the dust devils seemed to recede, the storm clouds to dissipate. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Caleb felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. He had made his choice, and he was ready to face the consequences, whatever they may be. That night, as the moon cast long skeletal shadows across the trading post, Caleb prepared for their departure. He checked Ghost's saddle, ensuring the cinches were tight and the pack was secured. He sharpened his knife, the steel glinting in the dim light. He cleaned his rifle, the familiar weight of it comforting in his hands. He tried to sleep, but his mind was racing. He replayed their journey in his head, anticipating the challenges that lay ahead. He imagined the vastness of the plains, the dangers of the mountains, the uncertainty of the Indian territories. He thought of Aponi, her silent strength, her unwavering trust. He wondered about her past, about the life she had lost, about the future she deserved. He finally drifted off to sleep, his dreams filled with images of dust devils and distant horizons. He awoke before dawn, the air crisp and cold. He stoked the fire, brewed a pot of coffee, and packed a meager breakfast of dried meat and hardtack. Aponi emerged from the room Jedediah had provided, her eyes still clouded with sleep. She helped him pack, her movements efficient and slant. As they were finishing up, Jedediah appeared, his face etched with concern. "You sure about this, Caleb?" he asked, his voice gruff. "It's a long and dangerous journey. You're risking everything." Caleb nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know," he said, "but I can't leave her here." Jedediah sighed. "Well, I wish you both the best of luck," he said. "And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to come back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch. "Here," he said, handing it to Caleb. "A little something for the road." Caleb opened the pouch. It was filled with gold coins. "I can't take this, Jedediah," he said. "We don't need it." "Take it," Jedediah insisted. "You'll need it more than I do. Consider it a loan. Pay me back when you can." Caleb hesitated. then nodded. "Thank you, Jedediah," he said. "We appreciate it." They saddled Ghost and prepared to leave. Caleb turned to Aponi, his eyes meeting hers. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, her expression determined. They mounted Ghost and rode out of the trading post, leaving behind the relative safety of Jedediah's establishment. They headed west towards the rising sun, towards the unknown. As they rode, Caleb noticed a change in Aponi. She seemed more alert, more focused. Her eyes scanned the horizon, her senses attuned to the sounds and smells of the wilderness. He realized that she was no longer just a victim, a captive. She was a survivor, a warrior. She was returning to her element, to the land that she knew and loved. He felt a surge of confidence, a belief that they could overcome any obstacle, that they could reach their destination. They rode for hours, the sun beating down on their backs. The landscape stretched out before them, a vast expanse of rolling hills and scrub brush. As they approached a small stream, Caleb called a halt. He dismounted and helped Aponi down from Ghost. "We'll rest here for a while," he said. "Give Ghost a chance to drink." They led Ghost to the stream and watched as he drank deeply. Caleb took out his canteen and filled it with water. He offered some to Aponi, who drank it gratefully. As they were resting, Aponi suddenly tugged at Caleb's sleeve. She pointed towards a cluster of rocks nearby. Caleb followed her gaze. He saw nothing unusual. "What is it?" he asked. Aponi hesitated, then reached into her tunic. She pulled out a small pouch made of soft leather. She untied the pouch and carefully emptied its contents into her hand. Caleb gasped. In her hand lay a silver locket, intricately engraved with the image of a woman. The woman in the locket had long flowing hair and a gentle smile. She looked remarkably like Aponi. Caleb stared at the locket, his mind racing. Where had she gotten it? Who was the woman in the picture? He looked at Aponi, his eyes filled with questions. She looked back at him, her expression pleading. She seemed to be asking him to understand, to believe her. He reached out and took the locket from her hand. He examined it closely, turning it over and over in his fingers. The silver was tarnished, the engraving worn, but the image of the woman was still clear, still vibrant. He noticed something else, something he had missed at first glance. On the back of the locket, there was a small inscription, barely visible to the naked eye. He squinted, trying to make out the letters. "Sarah," he read, his voice barely a whisper. "Beloved daughter." Sarah. That was the name of his wife. He looked at Aponi, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Aponi hesitated, then pointed to her head. She tapped her temple, indicating that she remembered something. She began to speak, her voice hesitant, broken. My mother," she said, her words halting. She gave it to me, before they took me." Caleb stared at her, his mind reeling. Could it be possible? Could Aponi be related to Sarah? Could she be the daughter of someone Sarah knew, someone she loved? He remembered Sarah's stories of her childhood, of the friends she had made, of the family she had left behind. He remembered her tales of the orphan train, of the children who had been sent west to find new homes. Could Aponi be one of those children? Could she have been separated from her family, lost in the vastness of the American West? He looked at the locket again, at the image of the woman with the gentle smile. He saw a resemblance to Sarah, a shared kindness in their eyes. He looked at Aponi, at her ragged clothes, her haunted eyes. He saw a flicker of recognition, a spark of hope. He knew in that moment that he had to help her. He had to find her family, to uncover the truth about her past. He owed it to her. He owed it to Sarah, and he owed it to himself. He closed his hand around the locket, his grip firm. He looked at Aponi, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll find them," he said, his voice strong. "We'll find your family. I promise." Aponi looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. She reached out and took his hand, her grip tight. They stood there for a long moment, hand in hand, their hearts filled with hope and uncertainty. The dust devils, though still swirling around them, seemed a little less menacing tonight, as if even the forces of nature recognized the strength of their bond, the power of their shared purpose. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but they were not alone. They had each other, and they had a glimmer of hope to guide them through the darkness. The newfound hope, fragile as a desert bloom, couldn't mask the hard truth. They were still running. Caleb knew the men who'd strung Aponi up wouldn't just let it go. They were the kind who held a grudge tighter than a drowning man clings to driftwood. He scanned the horizon constantly, his senses honed to a razor's edge. 2 days out from Jedediah's, a cold knot formed in his gut. He spotted them first. 2 riders, black silhouettes against the shimmering heat haze, heading their way with a purpose that felt like a physical blow. They were bounty hunters. He knew it in his bones. The lean, hungry look, the way they sat their horse, all business, no sole. He didn't say anything to Aponi, not wanting to frighten her. He simply tightened his grip on the reins and steered Ghost towards a rocky outcrop, offering a modicum of cover. He dismounted, helping Aponi down, his movements deliberate and calm, belying the storm brewing in him. "Stay here," he murmured, his voice low. "Behind the rocks. Don't make a sound." Aponi, sensing the danger, obeyed without question. Her eyes, wide and fearful, were fixed on the approaching riders. Caleb checked his rifle, the smooth steel a familiar comfort in his hands. He tucked it back into its scabbard, opting instead for the Colt Peacemaker strapping to his hip. Faster draw, more personal. He stood his ground, waiting. The bounty hunters drew closer, the clatter of their horses' hooves echoing in the still air. As they reined in their mounts, their faces came into view. The first one was tall and gaunt, with a thin, cruel mouth and eyes that glinted like chips of obsidian. He wore a dusty black duster and a low-slung gun belt. The second was shorter and stockier, with a face like a clenched fist and a thick, greasy beard. He carried a sawed-off shotgun across his lap. "Howdy, stranger," the tall one drawled, his voice like gravel. "We're looking for a young Indian girl. Heard she might be heading this way." Caleb met his gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Haven't seen anyone," he said, his voice flat. The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed. "Don't play coy with us, old man. We know she's with you. We saw you leave Jedediah's." "You're mistaken," Caleb replied, his hand hovering near his gun. "Maybe," the bounty hunter said, a flicker of a smile playing on his lips. "Or maybe you're lying. Either way, we're gonna take a look around." He dismounted, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. The other bounty hunter followed suit, his shotgun held loosely but menacingly. Caleb knew this was it. He had 2 choices. Let them search, knowing they wouldn't hesitate to hurt Aponi, or stand his ground and fight. He chose the latter. "I wouldn't do that," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's under my protection." The tall bounty hunter laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Protection? You look like you're about ready to fall over and die." "Maybe," Caleb said, his eyes hardening. "But I can still shoot straight." He drew his Colt, the movement lightning fast. The bounty hunter's eyes widened in surprise, but it was too late. Caleb fired, the sound echoing across the plains. The tall bounty hunter staggered back, clutching his chest. A crimson stain spread across his duster. He crumpled to the ground, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. The other bounty hunter reacted instantly, raising his shotgun. Caleb ducked behind Ghost, the blast of the shotgun tearing through the air. Pellets whizzed past his head, kicking up dust and gravel. He rolled out from behind Ghost, firing again. The second shot hit the bounty hunter in the leg, sending him sprawling. He dropped the shotgun and clutched his wounded limb, howling in pain. Caleb stood up, his Colt still smoking. He approached the wounded bounty hunter, his face grim. "Where did you hear about Aponi?" he demanded, his voice cold. The bounty hunter looked up at him, his eyes filled with fear and hatred. It was them men, the ones who tied her up," he gasped. "They hired us to bring her back." "Why?" Caleb asked. "They said she stole something valuable." Caleb knew that wasn't the whole story. There was something else, something deeper, driving their hatred. "What did she steal?" he pressed. The bounty hunter hesitated, then spoke, his voice barely audible. "She knows where the gold is. The Comanche gold." Caleb's blood ran cold. The Comanche gold. He'd heard whispers of it, legends of a vast treasure hidden somewhere in the Indian territories. Gold stolen from settlers, accumulated over decades of raids and warfare. So that was it. Aponi wasn't just a runaway. She was a key to a fortune. He looked down at the wounded bounty hunter, his face etched with disgust. "You should have stayed away," he said, his voice low. He raised his Colt, and the sound of another gunshot echoed across the plains. He walked back to the rocky outcrop, where Aponi was waiting. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. He holstered his gun and knelt down beside her. He took her hand, his grip firm. "It's over," he said, his voice gentle. "They won't bother us anymore." Aponi nodded, her eyes searching his face. She didn't speak, but he knew she understood. He helped her to her feet, and they walked back to Ghost. He mounted the horse, then reached down and pulled Aponi up behind him. They rode away from the scene of the shootout, leaving the bodies of the bounty hunters behind. The sun beat down on their backs, the dust devils swirled around them, and the vastness of the American West stretched out before them. They were still running, but now they knew what they were running from. It wasn't just prejudice and hatred. It was greed and the lure of a lost treasure. And Caleb knew that their journey had just become a whole lot more dangerous. He glanced back, just once, at the two dark shapes sprawled on the sun-baked earth. He hadn't wanted it to come to that. But some men just didn't leave you a choice. The silent rancher had spoken, and his words were bullets. The knowledge of the Comanche gold hung heavy in the air, a tangible weight adding to the already oppressive heat. Caleb urged Ghost onward, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He knew the surviving bounty hunter, wounded as he was, would be back. And he wouldn't be alone. The lure of such a treasure would draw others like vultures to a carcass. They rode for hours, the landscape blurring into a monotonous tapestry of scrub and rock. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and blood-red. Caleb knew they needed to find a defensible position before nightfall. Darkness would be their enemy, masking the approach of their pursuers. He spotted it then, a narrow canyon carved into the earth by centuries of wind and rain. The walls were steep and rocky, offering natural cover. The entrance was narrow, easily defended. It was the best they could hope for. He guided Ghost into the canyon, the sound of the horse's hooves echoing off the stone walls. Aponi remained silent, her face pale but resolute. She trusted him, he knew, and that trust was a burden he carried with every step. They dismounted and began to prepare their defense. Caleb gathered rocks and piled them at the entrance, creating a makeshift barricade. Aponi helped, her movements quick and efficient. She might be young, but she was resourceful and strong. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, Caleb felt a familiar prickling sensation on the back of his neck. They were coming. He positioned Aponi behind a large boulder, instructing her to stay hidden and quiet. He took his place behind the barricade, his rifle resting across the rocks. He checked the action, ensuring the chamber was clear. He had only a handful of cartridges left. He would have to make every shot count. The silence of the canyon was broken by the distant sound of approaching horses' hooves. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was almost deafening. Caleb peered through the gaps in the barricade, his eyes narrowed. He saw them then. 3 riders silhouetted against the darkening sky. The wounded bounty hunter was among them, his leg bandaged, but his face contorted with rage. The other 2 were strangers, rough-looking men with hard eyes and weathered faces. They were clearly mercenaries, hired guns drawn by the promise of gold. They reined in their horses at the entrance to the canyon, their eyes scanning the shadows. "We know you're in there, old man," the wounded bounty hunter shouted, his voice hoarse. "Come out now, and maybe we'll let the girl live." Caleb remained silent, his finger resting on the trigger of his rifle. "Don't be a fool," another of the riders yelled. "There's 3 of us, and only 1 of you. You can't win." Caleb took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He knew they were right. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. But he wouldn't surrender. He wouldn't let them take Aponi. "Go away," he said, his voice low but firm. "Leave us alone." The bounty hunter laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You think we're gonna leave? We're here for the gold, old man, and we're not leaving without it." "There is no gold," Caleb said. "It's just a story." "Don't lie to us," the bounty hunter snarled. "We know she knows where it is, and we're gonna get it, one way or another." Caleb knew there was no reasoning with them. They were driven by greed, blinded by the promise of riches. He had only one option left. He raised his rifle, aiming carefully at the wounded bounty hunter. He squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the canyon. The bounty hunter screamed, clutching his chest. He slumped in his saddle, his body twitching. The other 2 riders reacted instantly, drawing their guns. Caleb ducked behind the barricade, the sound of bullets tearing through the air. Rocks exploded around him, sending shards of stone flying. He returned fire, aiming at the closest rider. He saw the man flinch, then fall from his horse. The 3rd rider dismounted, taking cover behind a large boulder. He began to fire, his shots coming fast and furious. Caleb could hear the bullets whizzing past his head, ricocheting off the rocks. He knew he couldn't stay behind the barricade forever. He was a sitting duck. He had to do something. He took a deep breath and peered over the rocks. He saw the rider, his face grim, reloading his gun. Caleb seized the opportunity. He jumped over the barricade, firing as he moved. The rider was caught by surprise. He stumbled back, dropping his gun. Caleb fired again, hitting the man in the shoulder. He cried out in pain, clutching his wound. Caleb advanced on him, his Colt peacemaker aimed at his head. The rider looked up at him, his eyes filled with terror. "Please," he begged, "don't kill me." Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to kill anyone, but he knew he couldn't let this man live. He would only come back with more men, more guns. He took a deep breath and pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the canyon. The rider slumped to the ground, his body still. Caleb stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, his hand trembling. He had done what he had to do. He had protected Aponi. But he knew this wasn't over. There would be others drawn by the lure of the Comanche gold. They would keep coming, until they found Aponi, or until he was dead. He turned and walked back to Aponi, who was still hiding behind the boulder. She looked at him, her eyes filled with questions. He knelt down beside her, taking her hand. "It's over," he said, his voice tired. "For now." Aponi nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. She knew the danger was far from over. She could feel it in the air, a palpable sense of dread that clung to the shadows of the canyon. The last rays of sunlight had vanished, leaving them in near total darkness. Caleb knew they couldn't stay here. They had to move on, to find a safer place to hide. But where could they go? The entire West was hunting them now. And the Comanche gold, which she didn't even possess, was the bait. He looked at Aponi, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the stars. He had promised to protect her, to help her find her people. But how could he keep that promise when the whole world seemed to be against them? He didn't have an answer. He only knew that he wouldn't abandon her. He would fight to the very end. He just hoped that end wasn't tonight. The cold desert air bit at their exposed skin. Caleb banked the dying embers of their small fire, not wanting to advertise their position any more than necessary. He pulled his worn blanket tighter around his shoulders, the silence of the canyon pressing in on them. Aponi sat huddled nearby, her gaze fixed on the star-dusted skiffy. He couldn't imagine what was going through her head. Fear, certainly. But also he sensed a quiet determination, a refusal to be broken by the relentless cruelty of their circumstances. As he stared at her, a glint of moonlight caught something she held clutched in her hand. He recognized it as a scrap of paper she'd picked up earlier, discarded near the bodies of the bounty hunters. He hadn't paid it much mind at the time. Probably just trash, he'd thought. But now, seeing her study it with such intensity, a knot of curiosity tightened in his gut. He moved closer, squatting beside her. "What's that you got there?" he asked, his voice low. Aponi hesitated, then slowly unfolded the paper. It was a wanted poster, faded and torn. The image was blurred, but Caleb could make out the rough outline of a man's face. Below the image, printed in bold letters, were the words, "Wanted, dead or alive." He was about to dismiss it, another grim reminder of the lawlessness of the West, when Aponi pointed to something else on the poster. A name, printed in smaller letters beneath the reward amount. She read, he thought, his mind reeling. He had just assumed because of her circumstances that she couldn't read or write. "This," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know this name." Caleb leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. The name was Elias Thorne. He didn't recognize it. "Who is he?" he asked. Aponi traced the letters with her finger, her brow furrowed in concentration. "He lost a daughter, many winters ago, to the Comanche." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He remembered the locket, the inscription, "Isa, beloved daughter." He remembered Sarah's stories of the orphan train, of the families torn apart by the harsh realities of the West. Could it be possible? Could Aponi be connected to this Elias Thorne? "How do you know this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Aponi looked up at him, her eyes filled with a strange mix of fear and hope. I heard the stories when I was with them. The Comanche, they spoke of him, of the rancher who never gave up searching for his lost daughter." Caleb's mind raced. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But if Aponi was right, if this Elias Thorne was her father, it could change everything. It could give her a home, a family, a chance at a new life. "Where does he live?" he asked, his voice urgent. Aponi pointed to a small town marked on the poster, barely legible. Near the Broken Ridge Mountains. Many days' ride through hostile territory, with bounty hunters and gold-crazed mercenaries on their trail. It was a suicide mission, but Caleb knew he had to try. He couldn't ignore the glimmer of hope that flickered in Aponi's eyes. "We'll go," he said, his voice firm. "We'll find this Elias Thorne." Aponi looked at him, her expression incredulous. "It is too dangerous," she said. "They will kill us." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but we can't stay here. We have to take a chance. He stood up, his resolve hardening. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but he had faced worse before, and he wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. "We'll leave at first light," he said. "We need to put as much distance between us and this place as possible." He spent the rest of the night preparing for their journey. He checked Ghost's saddle, ensuring the cinches were tight. He cleaned his rifle, the familiar weight of it comforting in his hands. He rationed their remaining supplies, knowing they would have to stretch them as far as they could. As dawn approached, painting the sky in hues of gray and pink, he woke Aponi. They ate a meager breakfast of dried meat and hardtack, their movements slant and efficient. They mounted Ghost and rode out of the canyon, leaving behind the bodies of the dead and the ghosts of their past. They headed towards the Broken Ridge Mountains, towards the unknown, towards the slim possibility of a future for Aponi. As they rode, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He scanned the horizon constantly, his senses on high alert. He knew their pursuers wouldn't give up easily. The lure of the Comanche gold was too strong. He also wrestled with the implications of Aponi's revelation. If Elias Thorne was her father, why had she been living with the Comanche? Why had she been sold as a slave? The questions swirled in his mind, adding to the weight of their already precarious situation. They rode for days, the landscape changing from barren desert to rolling hills and scrub brush. The Broken Ridge Mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks piercing the sky by. As they drew closer to the mountains, they began to see signs of civilization. Small settlements, scattered ranches, the occasional stagecoach. Caleb knew they had to be careful. They couldn't risk being seen by the wrong people. He decided to skirt the larger settlements, sticking to the back roads and trails. He knew it would add time to their journey, but it was the only way to ensure their safety. One evening, as they were making camp near a small stream, Caleb noticed something unusual. Aponi was staring intently at a distant ranch house, her face etched with a strange emotion. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Aponi hesitated, then pointed towards the ranch house. That is the Thorne Ranch," she said, her voice barely audible. I remember it." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. They were here. They had reached their destination. But what would they find? Would Elias Thorne recognize Aponi? Would he believe her story? He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He knew they had to be cautious. They couldn't just ride up to the ranch and announce their presence. They needed a plan. He decided to approach the ranch under the cover of darkness. He would scout the area, assess the situation, and then decide how to proceed. As darkness fell, Caleb and Aponi saddled Ghost and rode towards the Thorne Ranch. The ranch house was silhouetted against the night sky, a beacon of hope in the vast darkness of the west. Little did they know, the ranch was not just a beacon, but a fortress holding secrets, and more than just hope awaited them. They approached the ranch cautiously, the only sound the soft thud of Ghost's hooves on the dusty ground. Caleb kept a close eye on the surrounding terrain, his senses on high alert. He knew they were vulnerable out in the open, but they had to get close enough to assess the situation. As they drew nearer, Caleb could make out more details of the ranch. It was a large, sprawling complex, with several buildings clustered around a central courtyard. The main house was a two-story structure, built of stone and wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Lights flickered in the windows, casting long shadows across the yard. He spotted several men patrolling the perimeter, armed with rifles. They were clearly expecting trouble. It seemed word of the bounty hunters and the Comanche gold had spread further than he had hoped. Caleb pulled Ghost to a halt behind a cluster of trees, about 100 yards from the ranch house. He dismounted and helped Aponi down, his movements deliberate and quiet. "Stay here," he whispered. "I'm going to take a look around." Aponi nodded, her eyes fixed on the ranch house. He could sense her anticipation, her fear, her hope. It was all riding on this. Caleb moved silently through the shadows, using the trees and bushes for cover. He circled around the ranch, observing the layout, noting the positions of the guards. He needed to find a way to get Aponi inside, without attracting attention. He spotted a small barn on the far side of the ranch, away from the main house. It was dimly lit, but it looked relatively unguarded. It might be their best bet. He returned to Aponi, his face grim. "I have a plan," he said, his voice low. "It's risky, but it's the only chance we have." He explained his plan to Aponi, outlining the route they would take, the precautions they would need to take. She listened intently, her expression unwavering. Together, they moved through the darkness, their movements synchronized and silent. They reached the barn without being detected. Caleb carefully opened the door, peering inside. The barn was filled with hay bales and farm equipment. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the interior. He saw no one in sight. He ushered Aponi in sight, closing the door behind them. "Wait here," he said. "I'm going to find Elias Thorne." He slipped out of the barn and headed towards the main house, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he was taking a huge risk, but he had to do it. He had to give Aponi a chance. He approached the house cautiously, staying close to the shadows. He reached the porch and crept along the side, peering through the windows. He saw a group of people gathered in the living room. They were talking in hushed tones, their faces etched with worry. He recognized Elias Thorne among them. He was an older man, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He looked tired, but there was a strength in his gaze that Caleb admired. He saw his chance. He moved to the front door and knocked loudly. The talking stopped abruptly. The men inside grabbed their guns and moved towards the door. Caleb braced himself for the confrontation. The door swung open, revealing Elias Thorne. He looked at Caleb. His eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice gruff. "My name is Caleb," he said, his voice firm. "I need to talk to you about your daughter." Elias Thorne's face paled. He stared at Caleb, his eyes filled with disbelief. "What do you know about my daughter?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I know that she's alive," Caleb said, "and she's here, with me." Elias Thorne's eyes widened. He grabbed Caleb's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Take me to her." Caleb led Elias Thorne back to the barn, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment, the culmination of their long and perilous journey. He opened the barn door, revealing Aponi. She stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the lantern, her eyes fixed on Elias Thorne. The two stared at each other, their faces filled with a mixture of emotions. There was recognition, disbelief, and a profound sense of longing. Elias Thorne took a step towards Aponi, his hand outstretched. "Sarah?" he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Is it really you?" Aponi hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Father," she said, her voice barely audible. Elias Thorne rushed forward and embraced Aponi, holding her tightly in his arms. Tears streamed down his face. "My daughter," he sobbed. "You're home. You're finally home." Aponi clung to her father, her own tears flowing freely. She had found him. After all these years, she had finally found her way home. Caleb watched the reunion, his heart filled with a bittersweet emotion. He was happy for Aponi, but he knew his work here was done. He had fulfilled his promise. But something wasn't right. The embrace lingered, but Caleb saw confusion flicker across Thorne's face as he held her. It wasn't the polished girl he remembered. Aponi was hardened. Her eyes held the knowledge of a life he couldn't fathom. The refined manners were gone, replaced by a quiet strength forged in the crucible of survival. He pulled back slightly, searching her face, a flicker of doubt clouding his joy. "Sarah?" he repeated. But this time the name held a question. It's been so long. You've changed." Aponi met his gaze, her own unanswering. "I have lived a hard life," she said, her voice steady. "But I am still your daughter." Thorn's face crumpled, not with doubt, but with the realization of what she had endured. He pulled her close again, his embrace tighter than before. "I know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I know, and I will never let you go again." But Caleb knew, even as he watched the tender scene unfold, that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The past had a way of clinging to the present, and the shadows of Aponi's experiences would linger, testing the strength of their newfound bond. And then there was the matter of the Comanche gold. He knew that Elias Thorn, good man though he seemed, would be dragged into this conflict. His job wasn't done. Not yet. Even as Thorn held his daughter, a shadow fell across Caleb's face. He knew what he had to do. He had delivered Aponi to a safe haven. As safe as any place could be in this unforgiving land. His purpose for now was fulfilled. He stepped back, away from the embrace, making his presence known without uttering a word. Thorn looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but filled with gratitude. "You," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You brought her back to me. I don't know how to thank you." Caleb shook his head, his gaze fixed on Aponi. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She knew he wouldn't stay. She understood the way of the West, the solitary path of men like him. "No thanks needed," Caleb said, his voice low. "She's home. That's all that matters." Thorn reached into his pocket, pulling out a wad of bills. "I insist," he said, holding out the money. "You deserve something for what you've done." Caleb refused to take it, pushing Thorn's hand back gently. "I didn't do it for the money," he said. "Keep it. You'll need it for her." He knew Aponi would need clothes, a soft bed, and perhaps most of all, time to heal. Money could buy some of that. Thorn stared at him, his eyes filled with respect. "At least tell me your name," he said, "so I can remember the man who saved my daughter." Caleb hesitated, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Just remember her." He turned to leave, his silhouette framed in the doorway of the barn. Aponi stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Will I see you again?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb looked at her, his eyes filled with a tenderness he rarely allowed himself to show. "Maybe," he said, "but don't count on it. The West is a big place." He knew the odds were slim. Their paths might never cross again. But he also knew that he would never forget her. She was a survivor, a fighter, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Thorn watched him go, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and regret. He knew he owed this man a debt he could never repay. "He's a good man," Thorn said, turning to Aponi. "A rare breed in this world." Aponi nodded, her gaze fixed on the spot where Caleb had disappeared. "He saved my life," she said. "More than once." Thorn put his arm around her, pulling her close. "He gave you back to me," he said. "And that's the greatest gift anyone could ever give." Inside the ranch house, the other men were whispering, their faces etched with concern. They knew that Caleb's departure didn't mean the danger was over. The bounty hunters were still out there, and they wouldn't give up until they found Aponi and the Comanche gold. Thorn knew he had to protect his daughter, even if it meant resorting to violence. He had lost her once, and he wouldn't lose her again. He looked at Aponi, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll be safe here," he said. "I won't let anything happen to you." Aponi nodded, but she knew that safety was an illusion. The West was a dangerous place, and no one was ever truly safe. As Caleb rode away from the Thorn Ranch, He felt a strange mix of emotions. He was relieved that Aponi was safe, but he also felt a pang of weakness. He had grown attached to her, and he would miss her fierce spirit and unwavering loyalty. He spurred Ghost onward, heading towards the setting sun. He didn't know where he was going, or what he would do next. He only knew that he had to keep moving. He couldn't stay in one place for too long. The past had a way of catching up to him. As he rode, he thought about Aponi and Elias Thorne. He hoped they would be able to find peace and happiness together. He hoped they could overcome the challenges that lay ahead. He also thought about the Comanche gold. He knew that it was still out there, waiting to be found, and he knew that it would continue to attract greedy men and violent outlaws. He wondered if he should try to find it himself. He could use the money to help others, to ease the suffering of the less fortunate. But he quickly dismissed the idea. He had no desire for riches. He had seen too much death and destruction caused by greed. He preferred to live a simple life, free from the temptations of wealth and power. He was a drifter, a wanderer, a silent observer of the human drama that unfolded across the vast landscape of the West. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Caleb reached a high ridge overlooking a wide expanse of prairie. He stopped Ghost and dismounted, gazing out at the breathtaking view. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. He was a part of this land, a part of its history. He was a cowboy, a survivor, a silent guardian of the West. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp, clean air. He closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the prairie, the rustling of the grass, the chirping of the crickets, the distant howl of a coyote. He felt both lighter and heavier than before. Lighter because he had done a good deed, heavier because he knew the world was still full of suffering and injustice. He opened his eyes and looked out at the horizon. The sun had disappeared, leaving behind a ski full of stars. He mounted Ghost and rode off into the darkness, another faceless cowboy riding into history, leaving honestly the whisper of wind and the echo of hooves in the vast silence of the woods. Aponi stood on the porch, the cool night air raising goose flesh on her arms. She watched Caleb disappear, swallowed by the vast, indifferent darkness. The locket, cool metal against her palm, felt like a tangible piece of a life. She was now struggling to reconcile with this new reality. The rough-hewn planks of the porch, the warmth emanating from the house behind her, the scent of her father's pipe tobacco. These were alien sensations, yet somehow deeply familiar. She closed her eyes, picturing Caleb's face, etched with a quiet resolve that mirrored the landscape itself. He was a ghost rider, a fleeting presence in her life, a reminder that even in the harshest of environments, compassion could bloom. "He's gone," her father said softly, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Aponi opened her eyes, turning to face him. Elias Thorne looked weary, the lines on his face deepened by years of worry and loss. But in his eyes, she saw a flicker of the man she remembered from her childhood, the loving father who had told her stories and brushed her hair. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's gone." But he wasn't truly gone, not from her heart. He had set her on a new path, one that led back to her family, back to a life she thought she had lost forever. Now she had to navigate it. Thorne squeezed her shoulder. "Come inside, Sarah, it's cold, and we have much to talk about." He still called her Sarah. It was a name she hadn't heard in years, a name that belonged to a different girl, a girl who had been lost to the Comanche. She wondered if she could ever truly be Sarah again, or if she was destined to be forever caught between two worlds. Inside the house, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. The men who had been guarding the ranch earlier now sat around the table, their faces grim. They were loyal to Thorne, but Aponi sensed a wary curiosity in their gaze. She was an outsider, a woman who had lived among the Comanche, a woman who might bring trouble to their doorstep. Thorn cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "This is my daughter, Sarah," he said, his voice firm. "She's been through a lot, and she needs our support. I expect you all to treat her with the respect she deserves." The men nodded, their expressions softening slightly. But Aponi knew that words were just words. She would have to earn their trust, prove that she was one of them, despite her past. "We're glad to have you back, Sarah," one of the men said. His name was Jeb. He was older, with a kind face and calloused hands. "This place hasn't been the same without a woman's touch." Aponi managed a weak smile. She knew what he meant. The ranch was a man's world, rough and unforgiving. She would have to learn to navigate it, to find her place in this new order. Over the next few days, Aponi began to settle into life at the Thorn Ranch. She helped with the chores, learning to cook and clean and mend cars. She spent hours talking to her father, sharing stories of her life with the Comanche, trying to bridge the gap between their vastly different experiences. It wasn't easy. Thorn struggled to understand the life she had led, the customs and traditions of the people she had lived with. He couldn't comprehend the violence she had witnessed, the hardships she had endured. But he listened, his eyes filled with compassion. He tried to imagine what it must have been like for her, to be torn from her family and forced to live among strangers. He knew that she had suffered, and he wanted to do everything he could to ease her pain. Aponi, in turn, tried to understand her father's world, the world of cattle ranching and frontier justice. She learned about the challenges he faced, the droughts and the rustlers, the constant struggle to survive in this unforgiving land. She also learned about the prejudice and hatred that existed between the white settlers and the Native Americans. She saw the fear in their eyes, the suspicion in their voice. She realized that she was caught in the middle, a bridge between two cultures that were constantly at war. One day, while she was helping Jeb mend a fence, she asked him about the Comanche. "Do you hate them?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Jeb paused, his brow furrowed. "Hate is a strong word, Sarah," he said. "I don't hate them all. But I've seen what they can do. I've seen the destruction they leave behind. It's hard to forget that." Aponi nodded, understanding his perspective. She had seen the same destruction, the same violence. But she had also seen the humanity of the Comanche, their loyalty, their courage, their deep connection to the land. She knew that she couldn't change the way people felt about the Comanche, but she could try to educate them, to show them that they were not all savages, that they were human beings with their own stories and their own struggles. She decided to start small, by sharing her own stories, by talking about the people she had lived with, by trying to bridge the gap between their two worlds. It was a slow and difficult process. Some people were receptive, willing to listen and learn. Others were closed-minded, unwilling to change their prejudices. But Aponi persevered, driven by a deep sense of purpose. She knew that she had a responsibility to both her father and her Comanche family. She had to find a way to reconcile her two worlds, to create a future where peace and understanding were possible. One evening, as she sat on the porch with her father, watching the sun set, she thought about Caleb. She wondered where he was, what he was doing. She hoped that he was safe, that he had found some measure of peace in his solitary existence. She also knew that he would never truly be at peace, not until the West was tamed, not until the violence and hatred were replaced by compassion and understanding. But she also knew that even in this untamed wilderness, small acts of kindness could still blossom, like wildflowers in the desert, offering a fragile hope for a better future. And she would keep planting those seeds of hope, one story, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. She would honor the memory of Sala, the silent cowboy who had changed her life forever by striving to make the West a little bit less wild, a little bit more humane. The locket, nestled against her skin, felt warm, a reminder of her past and a promise for her future.